friends. Welcome into Lessons from Living. I am your host, Beth Graham, and I am so glad you're here today. It is the power and purpose of this podcast to motivate change through inspiration, all for God's glory. And hopefully, we accomplish that today. This is a solo episode. It's a topic that I've been thinking about for some time, at least 3 or 4 months. I had kind of put it on the back burner, and then my assistant mentioned just last week, this is a topic that you really need to talk about. And so anytime something like that is mentioned more than once, it's typically the Holy Spirit getting involved, and typically something that I feel God is compelling me to share. And so that's what I'm going to do today. This is a difficult story to tell, which is why I put it on the back burner. It is deeply personal. It's something I don't like to talk about. You probably don't either. But because my assistant confirmed that this is probably something that needs to be discussed, and also I truly am convicted that it could benefit others, I'm going to be obedient and share it. I'm going to tell you probably too much information about how I arrived at this philosophy, because it has been a process. And I think you kind of need to hear the whole story so that you realize I didn't just pull this out of thin air. There is a basis for me arriving at this place. And you will see that, the connection. That is my intention anyway. So many of you know that I'm a breast cancer survivor. In the breast cancer world, the word remission is never used. And that is the case because it so often recurs. And the assumption is that it remains in your body. My frustration with breast cancer protocol is that there is no testing, there's no scanning. They wait until something crops up, and then they deal with it at that time. And for someone like myself who has a pretty high pain tolerance and doesn't give typically a lot of thought to the things that are cropping up erroneously in my body, that can be a problem. You can miss something. So the reason that breast cancer experts give for this protocol is that the end result is the same. What they believe is that whether you have a tumor in a specific location that's just isolated, or you have a body that is riddled with cancer, the end result is the same. So it is incurable at that point once it's metastatic, and there's not a whole lot you can do. You will not be long on this earth, most likely. The fallacy I see with their logic is that there is really no convincing me that one isolated tumor in a specific location is an equivalent cancer load to a body riddled with cancer. And I cannot believe that there is not some benefit to finding out early, and the possibility of having at least an extension on your remaining time would be much higher. That is just logical to me. What general health experts say about surviving cancer is to be proactive. If you see something, feel something that is inexplicable, that doesn't really have an origin that you can trace, do something about it. So it, get a scan done, you know, um, be proactive. So that's what I have tried to do, is be proactive when something crops up. But as I said, I'm not that great at it. So what this looks like practically is you feel a persistent pain that cannot be explained. You watch it, you wonder about it, you try to notice if it goes away or if it persists, if it increases or if it decreases in intensity. And if it persists, then you call the oncologist, and the oncologist is the one who makes the call as to whether something is going to be scanned. Just the nature of scans, depending upon what scan they advocate using, depends on when you can get in to get it done, how long that will take, and of course, then you're waiting for results as well. And what happens with me, and I think this is very common, but I have a very vivid imagination. And so what happens is during the period of time that you decide, okay, this is important enough to get a scan, and you convince the oncologist, I want to pursue this, and you wait for the scan and then have the scan and then wait for the results, my mind just is working overtime and my subconscious is working overtime. And as positive a person as I am, my brain can make pain worse. My brain can make something bigger than it actually is. My brain can believe that something's there that isn't there at all. And just a quick example of this. When I was first diagnosed, what they do is they scan certain areas of your body because, particularly with breast cancer, if it has metastasized already, then they're not even going to give you chemotherapy. They just won't put you through that if it is already to that stage. So they did a brain scan, for example, which is one area that brain cancer commonly metastasizes to. And I know nothing about brain scans, but I did know that when you have a contrast that is put into your body, then things will light up, you know, and I assumed that, okay, if I have a mass in my brain, then it will light up and I'll see it. So I guess I believe this was an MRI, and I was in the tube, and then as I was coming out, the image was above my head. And it was gray, gray, gray. And then all of a sudden I see this area that is just neon. And at the same time, these two technicians who were in the room were in the corner whispering about something. So they're whispering. I see this lit up piece of my brain, and they kept glancing over at me surreptitiously. Well, of course, I assume that they know this is really bad. They are not allowed to say anything to you. That's why you have to wait for the results of a radiologist. Looking back at it, they were probably talking about, you know, getting drunk the other night together, or a divorce that one of them is going through. I don't know. But of course, I instantly believed that this was a really bad situation. And, you know, I called Richard, and I don't do that anymore just because you don't know. And that's the bottom line. But I called him, he got upset. And thank God this was on a Friday, he called my oncologist and he said, you know, I know that we're supposed to wait until next week sometime, but my wife will not survive to that time, if you can just let her know what the scan results are. And thank goodness she was kind enough to call. And her first comment was, will you stop self-diagnosing? She said, there is nothing wrong with the scan. It's fine. So you can see how that's just an example of how something can't very arbitrarily be said that you interpret a certain way that has nothing to do. You can see, my point is that this is a bit of a roller coaster. It's very much a difficult way to live. And for someone who's never experienced living like this, it sucks. You are forced to always look for the negative. And this is the antithesis of how I roll. I don't like living like that. I'm a very positive person. I always am looking for the positive. I want to wake up in the morning in a happy frame of mind. And this is just really a difficult way to live your life. When I was first diagnosed, I had this nighttime ritual where, you know, I could be doing okay during the day, but then for some reason when I went to bed, I don't know if it's that my defenses were down or perhaps that's a time that the dark forces look at me and say, you know, she is vulnerable right now. And it was a very dark time. I was thinking about the difficult conversations I would have to have with my kids, the short period of time I probably had left, planning my own funeral. It was very bleak. And one of my friends who's also experienced the breast cancer journey said, you know, when you are having these dark thoughts at night, they are not of God. And I agree with her. God has repeatedly told us not to fear, that he will walk with us through whatever comes our way. So I believe that intrinsically. It's hard when you're in the midst of going through something like this, though, to maintain the kind of positive outlook that I have in every other way in my life. So I started intentionally being very intentional about the way that I go through this experience. And in those times when I am truly contemplating my mortality, because that's what those nighttime rituals were, I started thinking about it as an exercise and as a positive exercise. I know this sounds nuts because Americans in particular do not like thinking about death, but I wanted to flip the script and say, okay, how can I use this experience, these times when I am kind of in turmoil, to make a positive impact on my life? And in my last period of experiencing this process, this was several months ago, I asked myself a question. What if this is it? What if this truly is it? Say I have 6 months. Say I have 3 months. How am I going to spend that time? What this question does is allow you to think that if your time is truly limited, if your time is truly finite, your answer will define what is important to you. So I would ask myself, okay, if you had that period of time remaining, would you want to continue writing? Probably. Would you want to continue working out in a way where you're really trying to build your muscle and you're trying to, you're seeking longevity, say, probably not, right? And I've found that when I do this, my answer always revolves around my friends and family, that I would want to be with them. I would want to spend time with them. Your answer might be something totally different, and that's okay. But say I want to spend time with my family and friends, and that's how I want to spend my last moments. My follow-up question is, okay, if that is true, if that is truly the most important part of your life, then why aren't you doing that now? Why is not the majority of your time dedicated to spending the time on what you have announced, declared is your most important thing in your life? Now, for a normal human being who doesn't have the gravity of an impending diagnosis, this is hard. I've thought about this, like, how can you feel the seriousness of this that I feel when I'm going through this experience, but you have no reason to, right? And we'll get to some ideas about how to do that. But the reason that it is critical is because you are essentially reviewing and asking yourself, what is most important? And we have a tendency to get so distracted in this mortal life. I'll give you an example. I just had this conversation with some friends who were talking about the fact that their kids and they themselves are really into brand name products, and that's really important to them. And I was thinking about that. These are great people. They are wonderful people. But the thought occurred to me how we get sucked into this vortex of things that, if you held them up against what is most important in your life, they probably would pale in comparison, right? And so we get sucked into this focusing on silly, petty things that we just willingly turn over precious hours of our lives to. I feel the same way about use of the phone and social media and all this stuff. We find ourselves obsessed. That's a word that so many people are using now, and that's even strong for this. What about distracted? We find ourselves distracted, and just the distraction is too much, So how do we get back to center? How do you really go about focusing on what is truly important? Well, this method that I'm talking about, this philosophy, I think does that very effectively. When you think about your mortality and you contemplate final days, as morbid as it may sound, you are effectively able to focus in on what is important. Psalm 90:12 says, "Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And what that is saying essentially is help us to appreciate the brevity of life so that we can effectively focus on what is most important, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. As I said, I recognize that for someone who constantly has their mortality thrown in their face, this is easier. And if that is not the case for you, and I pray to God it's not, you must create your own sense of urgency. How do you do that? Well, my assistant Roy and I were talking about the reason that this came to his mind was he was taking a walk through a cemetery. Well, that's interesting. You know, he's looking at these headstones, and it just became impressed upon him that his time is limited. And this is a young person, but his time is limited. And it was that experience of walking through the cemetery. Maybe after every funeral you're a party to, consider about that person who passed, how they lived their life. You know, would you want to live your life differently? Perhaps you want to emulate that kind of life. Just the consideration of that experience. Whenever I hear about a tragedy, and it seems like there's one every other day, say a young life cut short, it lingers with me. And I kind of allow it to. I allow the opportunity to be impressed again with what a gift every single day is. The bottom line is our time is limited. So we have the option to either drift and allow the circumstances of everyday life to kind of take our lives and our time where it may, or you can seek to intentionally craft a life that is consistent with your values. Ask yourself, are the values of your day lining up consistently with what you claim is most important in your life? And I think that if you make this a periodic exercise, maybe once a quarter or every 6 months, to evaluate where you are in your journey, the best part of this is that things become very simple. You know, we were talking about distraction. Well, complexity in life, of which there is a great deal, brings further distraction. Whereas focusing on what is most important helps make decisions very clear. Knowing what is important. If your big thing is being with family, then the question of location is pretty easy, right? If you know what is important, your decision about a job becomes much more clear. So long term, this process makes your life more clear and more simple. I want to dig into this more in the future, but that will at least give you a taste of what I've been thinking about. And I will leave you today with a quote by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Such a mouthful. For the secret of human existence lies not only in living, but in knowing what to live for. May you be able to go through a process where you can determine for yourself what to live for. Go out and make it a great day.